Good evening. For those who are winding down conversation, if you're able to take your seats, we're about to get started. I don't ever quiet a room that quickly. Good evening. My name is Gina Casalino, and I serve as Dean of Students and Vice President for Student Affairs here at Carnegie Mellon University. And I am so very honored to welcome you all to our campus. And I hear that we have almost 300 people via live stream. We are so grateful that you've chosen to engage with us this evening here at Carnegie Mellon, which for decades has deeply valued our extensive partnerships with the Tree of Life community. For 23 years, I have called Carnegie Mellon home. And one of the hallmarks of my experience over these decades is an enduring commitment across our students, our faculty, our staff, who have been eager to build bridges of understanding among a campus community that brings one of the most diverse portfolios of faculty, staff, and students that I've had the privilege of being a part of from all around the globe here at CMU. Whether it's in the classroom, the lab, on stage, the lecture hall, at events like this one, or in the Deeper Conversations lecture series that President Jahanian launched 2 years ago, the Carnegie Mellon community leverages the power of civil discourse to tackle some of the most complex issues facing society today, with the utmost respect for the humanity and perspectives of people who are part of this very special community. Isn't that what a successful community is all about, whether it's academic or spiritual or civic? We continue to work together to ensure that every member of this community, regardless of where we come from, what we look like, how we worship, or whom we love, feels safe, welcome, and valued today and every day. We ask thoughtful questions with the intent to listen and learn from one another. And when a member of our community is struggling, we step up to help. 7 years ago, when the devastating and horrific crime of hate was perpetrated upon the Tree of Life congregation, the community here at Carnegie Mellon reeled alongside our Squirrel Hill neighbors in anguish and pain and fear. And it was right here in this building, downstairs in the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion, where students wanted a space where they could come together and feel safe. And some of the faculty and staff who most wanted to be with our Jewish students on that awful day came together that night. The brothers of A.E. Pi pivoted their plans. They were planning a homecoming dinner for their alumni and students that evening, and instead brought the brisket to the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion. And they gathered with faculty, staff, students, and I was privileged to sit with them, to bear witness, to break bread. We cried, we prayed together. It was so moving to be with this community that Saturday evening, who most wanted to be together with others who could hold them in that time of deep despair. Today, like all the days before, we must continue to be a community where people show up for one another, even when we don't agree, and especially when we're hurting. I'm proud to be a part of a community of learning that time and time again shows up and demonstrates that we are indeed stronger than hate. With respect, interest, and curiosity for what each of us brings to the table, sharing our ideas, our knowledge, and our perspectives. That brings light to darkness with demonstrations of empathy, compassion, and care for one another. I'm so grateful that each of you showed up tonight. Thank you for joining us, whether you're on the live stream or to a bustling room here in McConomy Auditorium at Carnegie Mellon. Together, we will fight back against hate in all its form. Your presence is an affirmation of a shared hope for the future that I know we all are yearning for. It is now very much my pleasure to welcome to the podium Carol Zawadzki, Chief Executive Officer of the Tree of Life. I'm sure many people in the room know Carol, whose energy, savviness, and passion have been key to driving forward this new path for the Tree of Life. Carol joined the Pittsburgh community nearly 2 years ago as the inaugural, nearly 3. It goes really quickly. As the inaugural CEO of the Tree of Life, thanks for the good correction, overseeing the public launch of the new institution dedicated to uprooting anti-Semitism and laying both the physical and the metaphorical groundwork for its future. With more than 30 years, did I get that right? More than 30 years of experience in the Jewish communal world, she has specialized in partnerships with the philanthropic community in her previous roles at the National Museum of American Jewish History and the Georgetown University Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics. Carol is past CEO of the Edlovich Jewish Community Center in Washington, D.C., and held senior positions at San Francisco's Jewish Community Center, the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage in Cleveland, the Jewish Museum in New York, and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. She began her career at Hebrew Union College's Skirball Museum and the J. Paul Getty Museum. Please join me in a very warm Carnegie Mellon welcome to Carol Zawadzki.
Thank you. Thank you, Gina, and thank you to the Carnegie Mellon University community who have been such outstanding partners. This evening could not have happened without you. Thank you to all of our guests here tonight, and as Gina mentioned, online as well. I'm thrilled to have Pam and Bret and all of you with us. I'd also like to thank our gracious host and partners, the McGuire Woods, Mara Rubin, Denton's, Woodland Management, and the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, without whose support this evening would not have been possible. Additionally, I'd like to thank many of you who are funders sitting here with us this evening and your support in the work of the Tree of Life. And of course, to the board leadership of the Tree of Life, and particularly to Michael Bernstein, our board president, who is in California celebrating with his family and sends his thanks to each of you as well. And the staff of the Tree of Life and the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, who work tirelessly to make events like this happen. It is my honor to host tonight's critical conversation. Before we begin, I'd like to start our conversation with a brief story of hope and resilience. Later this month, we will remember the 11 Jewish worshipers from 3 congregations who were murdered during the Shabbat services of 10/27. I hope that even as we remember our community's darkest hours, we also remember how the city of Pittsburgh and the world rallied alongside the 3 congregations and came together loudly to oppose anti-Semitism and hate. It is that communal response that brings us to today and inspires us every day at the Tree of Life. It is what we build on, the outpouring of love and support that transform a site of tragedy into one of light, hope, and possibility. As part of those efforts, earlier this year, we launched our traveling exhibition some of you may have seen at the University of Pittsburgh, Lessons from the Tree of Life, Lighting the Path Forward, which opened earlier this month in New York at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. The exhibition tells a story of not only what happened on October 27th, but also in the hours, days, weeks, and months afterward. It's a story that remembers the rich, full lives of those taken and the wholeness of the community that came together to support one another and ultimately build something new. It also places our story in the long history of anti-Semitism in this country, a history and a struggle many around this room know all too well. Over 200 years ago, President George Washington wrote to the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island. He welcomed Jews to the United States, promising that this nation gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. Yet despite this promise, anti-Semitism has long been a part of the American tradition. So we must ask, how is it that anti-Semitism has been so deeply rooted and pervasive in a country which since its founding has guaranteed freedom to Jewish people? Tonight, you will hear from Dr. Pamela Nadell and Bret Stephens, who will wrestle with that very question as we look at the long history of anti-Semitism in America. Pam is the author of the insightful new book, Anti-Semitism and American Tradition, which investigates the dark history of how anti-Semitism has threaded throughout America's history from colonial times to today. I've read the book, and I will say I read it backwards in the Jewish tradition. I started at the back. I opened it from the other side. The final chapter, which is why I read it backwards, very sobering. A new litany, Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, Poway, Jersey City, Muncie, October 7th. It's a reminder of the moment we are living in and the need for all of our work. Pam is the Patrick Clendenin Chair in Women's and Gender History at American University in Washington, D.C., and winner of the 2019 National Jewish Book Award. Jewish Book of the Year for America's Jewish Women, A History from Colonial Times to Today. Pam has testified before Congress 3 times and was the 4th witness in the congressional hearing with the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania. Her other books include Women Who Would Be Rabbis, A History of Women's Ordination, 1889 to 1985, a finalist for a National Jewish Book Award in Women's Studies, and a member of the Tree of Life Academic Advisory Committee, for which we are all deeply grateful. She is joined today by 2023 Pulitzer Prize winner and New York Times columnist, Bret Stephens. Bret was previously at the Wall Street Journal, where he served as deputy editorial page editor and wrote the Global View Foreign Affairs column, for which he won the Pulitzer. In addition to his work at the Times, Bret serves as editor-in-chief of Sapir, a Jewish quarterly published by the Maimonides Fund, which offers ideas for a thriving Jewish future. Previously, he was editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Bret is the recipient of numerous awards and distinctions, including 3 honorary doctorates and the Ellis Island Medal of Honor. Following their discussion, we will open the conversation to some questions from all of you and some folks online. There will be staff coming around and collecting note cards, which I will then give to Bret Stephens. So we will ask you, if you have a question, to please put it on a note card so that we can hand it off to Bret Stephens. Thank you very, very much, and I'd like to introduce Pam and Bret.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carol. Is the mic on? Are we? It's a great honor to be back in Pittsburgh. Obviously, I came here mainly to shop carpets with Lou Weiss, but also when the Tree of Life asked me to be in conversation with Pamela, it felt not just intellectually enticing, but morally important. So it's really a great honor to share this hour with you. Pamela, we last met in a debate
Right.
in, I think, June of 2022, for the American Jewish Committee's annual Great Debate. And the question was whether the golden age of American Jewry had passed. My argument was that it had. You argued to the contrary. A few things have happened since June of 22. How has your thinking shifted, evolved, or stayed the same?
First of all, thank you for being here with me today. That's really wonderful. And and also thank you, because that debate about the end of, is the golden age of American Jewry ending, that debate also gave me a chapter title, which is No Age is Entirely Golden. And things have changed.
I got a column out of that debate too, so you got a whole book, but at least a chapter.
So yes, things have, I mean, October 7th is, I think, a dividing line in the American Jewish experience and the world Jewish experience. But doesn't mean that, since we were assigned sides in that debate, and I had said I could argue your side. I wasn't sure you would have argued mine, which was that the golden age had not ended. So the question is, the golden age has ended. Golden ages are also really problematic because people assign to earlier periods golden ages when things are in trouble in their own time. And I hadn't heard that phrase that sort of the second half of the 20th century was a golden age for American Jews until we started looking back in the 2020s and seeing that things weren't so good anymore and maybe it had ended.
You began this thinking about this book and writing this book a long time before October the 7th. Was there a specific impetus, and what was it?
Well, it's why it's so important to be here, because it was Tree of Life that led me on the path to this book. And even when you and I met in 2022, I told you I'm writing this book. I mean, I was already in the middle of it. Spending 6 years writing a book for academic historians is not a long time. It actually seems like it came out pretty quickly. But what happened here at the Tree of Life, and why I'm so honored to be a member of the advisory committee working on the rebuild and working on how to tell the story in the new museum, is that the trauma that hit this community swirled beyond, and it swirled out to American Jews. And in my tiny little corner of that world, a group of historians began meeting to talk about how had we missed this story. We had written reams of books about American Jews' accomplishments, about their communities, about American Judaism. I had at that point I was in the middle of finishing a book on America's Jewish women, and we missed the story. And so that led me down the path.
And retroactively, when you think back to where your mind was a day before, on October 26th, the day before the Tree of Life, why do you think that we missed it? I mean, there were signs that it was present, but generally speaking, I think if you look at ADL reports from 10 or 12 years ago, there's a general consensus that the American Jewish community is increasingly safer, anti-Semitism increasingly more rare. What were the signs that retrospectively we could look back at and say this was amiss or this was odd?
One of the signs was something that somebody told me about the Jewish day school where my kids had gone for 13 years. And I don't think she was supposed to say this, but she mentioned that every morning before the students and the teachers came to school, bomb-sniffing dogs went through the building. This is in suburban Washington. And so I think I was aware of the way in which anti-Semitism was endangering the American Jewish community. Certainly post-Charlottesville, we were stunned by the marchers yelling, "Jews will not replace us." But I think the difference is that we always thought it was coming from a kind of fringe, not significant, certainly won't result in violence, but will result in attacks, venom expressed against American Jews. And then Charlottesville happened, and then Tree of Life happened, and then exactly 6 months later, Poe happened.
Let me try out a theory, a pet theory of mine on you, and tell me what you think, which is that in the last 20 years, ideas or ways of thinking that are not inherently anti-Semitic became much more commonplace in American life. The most obvious one is conspiracy theories. Anti-Semitism is not just a bigotry, it is a conspiracy theory about the Jews. So 15 years ago, there's a conspiracy theory, more than 15 years ago, 17 years ago, that a young senator from Illinois actually was born in Kenya. Other conspiracy theories take root across the spectrum, left and right, and also on any number of subjects. So how surprising that the conspiracy theorists should alight in time on the ultimate conspiracy theory, which is, in short, the Jews did it, or the Jews are behind it. Another, on the other side, I would say another kind of mental frame which took hold, I think, in much of the United States, particularly in academia, was this idea that successful people were privileged, and privilege is something that is, in a sense, unfair and unearned. And so therefore, without being on its face anti-Semitic, it wasn't hard to move from the idea that privilege is bad and privileged people are bad to saying, well, Jews are therefore bad because they are disproportionately privileged. Do these like anti-Semitic adjacencies, do they help explain how we arrived at the place we are?
Not only do they help explain it, but they also, since you raised academia, they also help to explain why academic learned societies in the early 20-teens, the American Studies Association, the Asian American Studies Association, they began passing resolutions which were essentially BDS resolutions, calling for the condemnation of Israel and also then the boycotting of not only Israeli scholars, but ultimately also of Jews. So what we are living through right now, especially in academia, but also in Hollywood, and also in the publishing industry, and frankly, it feels like everywhere, it has been brewing for a long time. And one of the things that I tried to do in that book was to understand the roots of that.
I want to touch on the title of your book, which I think is in its a quiet way, a very pregnant title, An American Tradition. I think most of us growing up thinking about our experience as Jews in the United States, and Carol mentioned George Washington's letter to the Newport congregation. We have a concept of an American tradition which is broadly and overwhelmingly welcoming, a golden Medina to which our forebears emigrated from shtetls and ghettos. But you're looking at a kind of a counter tradition in American life that begins, I guess, in 1654 with the arrival of Jews in New Amsterdam under the anti-Semitic governorship of Peter Stuyvesant, for which a high school that for many years was filled with Jews is named, but that's another story. Tell us about what the origins of that tradition are theologically and culturally.
The first thing I want to say is that, and you'll know what this is like when dealing with an editor, is an American tradition is not the subtitle, because subtitles of books get completely lost. It's after a comma, and this is a powerful tradition in American society that, frankly, the historians, my friends and I, we had largely ignored because we had seen all of these other things that had happened that, like you're saying, this is a counter tradition. I actually think it's maybe at this point the main tradition. But the idea of a tradition is that it's part and parcel of American life because, and you raised the question of Christian anti-Judaism, because of the ideas that the immigrants who founded this country brought over with them alongside their knapsacks. So when Peter Stuyvesant tries to expel the first 23 Jews to land in New Amsterdam in 1654, he calls them this deceitful race, such hateful enemies and blasphemers of the name of Christ, and he calls them usurers. And about the only thing he didn't say is that they committed the blood libel. So you have, the moment the first Jews are here, you hear these classic medieval and even pre-medieval anti-Semitic tropes.
And this is a largely religious strain, or does it have other tributaries?
Well, calling people usurers is not necessarily a religious strain. Definitely has other tributaries, and one of the things that we know is that, and you're talking about conspiracy theories, are what Jews are accused of doing morphs and changes over time, but the target remains the Jews, right? So once the Rothschilds begin to become sort of the key figures in Europe who are attacked for being the power behind the throne and causing wars and controlling the chaos in Europe, then almost immediately in the middle of the 19th century, people are writing and saying, well, they're going to come to America and do the same thing.
You write about this in your book, the effect of the revolutions of 1848 and the perception that the Rothschilds had financed the regimes that had suppressed these kind of early manifestations of workers or popular revolutions. This is obviously when Marx kind of comes of age and turns into a rabid anti-Semite, although the grandson of a rabbi himself.
Right.
But, how do you trace the history of the anti-Semitism of the American left, not just of the religious strains, but on the so-called progressive side of the political divide?
So one of the things that I do is I'm very careful to trace the anti-Semitism of the left. It really flares after the Six-Day War. And it's in the wake of, as you were talking earlier about, what are the Jews are white, the Jews are privileged, and the people that we need to be championing are those who are black and brown and are oppressed. And so we really see it surging immediately in the wake of the Six-Day War in the United States.
And this is a result of, at least partly, of Soviet propaganda.
Yeah, it's definitely partly the result of Soviet propaganda. The Soviets had launched in Europe a swastika campaign in early 1960 where they were painting swastikas on synagogues in West Germany to prove that East Germany was better and the Soviet Union was better. And then copycats brought the swastika campaign all around the world, including to, I don't know about Pittsburgh, but certainly to synagogues in New York and elsewhere, and also even to Israel. So the Soviets are the first ones to say, we're not anti-Semitic, we're only anti-Zionist.
This is something I really want to get into, because one of the things I think is difficult for non-Jewish or lay readers of or people attempting to understand anti-Semitism is the extent to which it is and has always been a shape-shifting virus that adapts and mutates to whatever the host body, wherever it finds advantage in the host body. So looking at American politics, not just in the last, say, 10 years, but say in the last 50, going back to the Zionism is Racism resolution at the United Nations, what have been the vectors of the disease? How has it been able to make itself so congenial in so many ideological quarters here in the United States?
So one of the things that jumps out at me is when we think of, especially you're going back to the 70s, the Zionism is Racism resolution that came out of the United Nations in November of that year actually started that summer at the UN Women's International Conference in Mexico City. And at that conference, they declared—
I was there.
You were?
I was in Mexico City. I wasn't at the conference. And I was 2, but.
All right. And I find that fascinating because also I've written a lot about women, but it was fascinating to me that an idea that comes out of a women's conference is going to make it to the mainstream, to the General Assembly. So we have that Zionism is racism, those attacks on Israel and those attacks on Israeli Jews, but really it spreads to American Jews. But at the same time, that's the moment when Holocaust denial begins emerging. And so you've got these various writers espousing Holocaust denial. And then, so we've got basically in the same 15, 20-year period, Zionism is racism, and we've got Holocaust deniers placing ads in college newspapers and saying that they're allowed to present their truth about what happened in the Holocaust. And this becomes a major issue in college newspapers in the 1990s. So you've got anti-Semitism from the right and the left at the same time.
And in different ethnic communities, I mean, one of the great vectors of this, tragically, was the Nation of Islam. I remember the early 1990s as a period when it was astonishing that Louis Farrakhan, who, was among other things, responsible for, or partly responsible for the death of Malcolm X and this fringe movement in Chicago, became such a powerful current in a community that had historically, a Black community that had historically been very closely connected and allied with the Jewish community. So it's happening, right and left, and also in just different communities in the United States. I want to come a little bit closer to the present, because I think one of the things that even in the last 7 years, even since Tree of Life, I think the American Jewish community has, broadly speaking, been absolutely astonished by the speed with which an anti-Semitic fringe is increasingly becoming an anti-Semitic mainstream. Tucker Carlson, who has, I think, the #1 political podcast in the United States, platforms historians, in inverted commas, who are essentially apologists for Hitler. Candace Owen, who is an avowed and militant anti-Semite. I think her podcast ranks as #3. And partly, I think this has to do not simply with ideological currents, it has to do simply with technology. Mm-hmm. And that these ideas have gone from the fringe to the center simply because it's that much easier to bring them into the center, so that an Alex Jones, another one of these characters, is just this massive presence, at least on a spectrum that most of us who inhabit the written word don't notice. But is there anything to be done about that? And the question I'm really driving at is that historically, I think the Jewish community, for very good reasons, has been very leery of any sorts of restrictions on First Amendment rights for all sorts of people to speak their mind, to publish freely, including some of the most disreputable ideas. Should we be, as a community, rethinking that sensibility about free speech, given how easily the most noxious ideas gain incredible ubiquity thanks to, social media, podcasts, other forms of new technologies?
The first thing to observe is that new technologies have historically spread anti-Semitic ideas. So the printing press comes, and all of a sudden ideas about the Jews committing blood libel spread way beyond those monasteries where only the monks were reading them. Then in the 1930s, we get Charles Coughlin, and about millions of Americans, I forget, a quarter or a third of Americans are tuning into him and his anti-Semitic tirades on the radio. And then ultimately he's shut down. And I've been saying, as you have, that the most dangerous fora today are the social media outlets where all of these conspiratorial lies are spread, and the issue is what can be done about that. So the charge of free speech allows for hate speech unless you hit the point where it's going to turn violent. And I know I looked at a couple of the law cases that dealt with this earlier, but they dealt with it in a time when we didn't have social media that would allow people to not only share their lies, but then also share their ideas about how they're going to act out on them.
I mean, the traditional argument in defense of free speech has always been that in the end, in the free contest of ideas, the good ideas win out. I'm less sure of that. Yeah. I mean, I still believe it, but with much less certainty now, when what really seems to be the case is that when any idea can find a massive audience, the worst ideas, the most pernicious and the most sort of lurid and attractive to people with lurid frames of mind, those are the ideas that are winning. Let's talk a little bit about strategies about how the Jewish community deals with it. And one strategy being championed by this administration is to penalize universities by other means on the allegation that they are not doing enough to police anti-Semitism. What do you think of it?
I think it's extremely dangerous because what we know, if you go back, for example, when he was running for office in November of 2023, Trump had a campaign video that he put out that he was going to create. He was going to tax the endowments of the rich universities, and he was going to create a free online university which would not be allowed to be woke and which was going to...
Did they already try out Trump University?
Yeah,
This is the second iteration.
It never, but what he wanted, he never got to tax the endowments, and essentially. So what happens is anti-Semitism bursts out in the wake of October 7th, and it becomes the means for going after the universities. But let's be honest, what does canceling cancer research grants have to do with solving the problem of anti-Semitism on campus? So, I mean, you and I have talked about this, I've been writing about this, that this is going to come back to haunt us, because when higher education in this country loses its international place of prestige in terms of research and in medicine, in engineering, in so many other areas, when that happens, somebody's going to remember that it started because of the Jews.
Let me push back a little bit,
okay,
just for the sake of argument. And I obviously agree that, killing research at, say, where my daughter goes to school, Johns Hopkins, life-saving research, just because it's Johns Hopkins, whose president is, a proud Jew and whose greatest benefactor is Mike Bloomberg, it's insane. On the other hand, there is a problem at universities. Right. You mentioned all of the academic associations that go out of their way on the most specious grounds to find an opportunity to condemn Israel when they don't condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. They don't condemn China for what it's doing to the Uyghurs. As the old joke about, the definition of a British anti-Semite is someone who hates Jews more than is strictly necessary. It's a joke to those who are watching. It feels like there's more Judeophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, or anti-Semitism masquerading as anti-Zionism on campus. So what do you do? And I want to press you with a bit of a specific anecdote. After October 7th, an alumnus of Amherst College, which is one of the best colleges in America, was worried about the climate for Jews on campus. And he insisted that Bret Stephens come give a talk on campus. I, happily trudged up to Amherst. And a pro-Palestinian, I shouldn't say pro-Palestinian, in my view, pro-Hamas group, decided that the best way to deal with it is to host another event at the same time. Mm-hmm. So the college could say, hey, we have viewpoint diversity, right? Because Bret Stephens is in auditorium A and the other side is in auditorium B. But it really was just promoting kind of viewpoint ghettoization, trying to play both sides by satisfying both constituencies, not exposing one side to the views of the other. My point is a big dodge. And so if withdrawing federal funds isn't going to work, if universities are going to kind of find ways to satisfy everyone, what does work? What would work?
So the first thing that I think has to happen, and a lot of us have been championing this on the college campuses, is we need to educate about anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, that our students get all sorts of trainings about various prejudices that they're not allowed to air. They know that they can never say the N-word on campus. That will get them in huge trouble. But they can say that they are calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. So, and we have not been able...
Well, it depends on the context.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I remember that line. But we need to somehow get that education out. And that's going to be an enormous, enormous battle to do that, because colleges and universities have not been willing to do that. Some schools, it's very few, but so far, for example, New York University have actually put calling someone a Zionist can be seen as hate speech, and it's in their student conduct code, which then gives them the right to raise
so
issues.
like Ken Marcus at the Brandeis Center.
Yeah, I know Ken.
Using Title VI to sue schools where pro-Israel students are being abused. You think that's a legitimate approach to?
I do think it's a legitimate approach, and look at the UCLA settlement, which was in the millions of dollars, paid a lawsuit brought by 2 law students and 1 undergraduate, that at UCLA they had been barred from parts of campus, and UCLA had to respond to that. But it would be better to have mechanisms to stop this rather than going through the lawsuit route.
One of my favorite lines in a presidential inaugural speech is one that is not instantly familiar. It's from Bill Clinton's first inaugural. And he said, "There is nothing wrong in America that can't be fixed by what's right in America." I think it's a beautiful line, a very meaningful line. So if he's right, and we're looking at this recrudescence, this return and rise of anti-Semitism, which in some sense expresses so much of what's wrong in America. What is it, and who is it, and how is it that Jews call upon the forces of what's right in America to fight this, to stop it, to turn it around?
We're in a moment where it's really hard to do that because so many of the former allies have broken ranks with the Jewish community and don't want anything to do with the Jewish community. Or what they say, and I've been in conversations like this with colleagues, where they'll literally turn to me and say, "I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Israel. Israel shouldn't exist." Right?
There's an old joke. A man in the Vienna train station is accosting passersby and asking them if they're anti-Semitic, and all of them angrily deny it. And then finally one man says, "Well, as a matter of fact, yes, I hate the Jews." He says, "Oh, thankfully, an honest man. Please look at my luggage. I need to run to the men's room."
That's good.
But actually, this gets to something that I think is very important, which is that today, there are very few honest anti-Semites. There are millions of dishonest anti-Semites, whether they're deceiving themselves or they're deceiving others. they are claiming to be something they're not. And I'm asking this with a very current political topic, which is New York City's mayoral race. And I'd like to just get your thoughts on what it means, what it says about America, that someone who refused on multiple occasions to denounce the term globalize the Intifada, who was marching on October 8th, and I remember those DSA marches, they were euphoric, they were delighted by what had happened, that he is now about to become, it seems, the mayor of the most important, the biggest, or second biggest Jewish city in the world.
It's shocking. I mean, it's inconceivable that, and it shows. It's problematic on so many levels. It's a reflection of problematics in terms of the Democratic Party that they couldn't find somebody else as a candidate. I mean, maybe that's where we need to start. Secondly, there's the problematics where what Jews say to counter the anti-Semitic lies just go nowhere, right? They just, I mean, if I say that the state of Israel is not a white settler colonial society, that 700,000 Jews got kicked out of North Africa and the Middle East in the wake of the establishment of the state of Israel, and that you could think about a population exchange between what happened in the Palestinians who left. If I say all those things, it just goes nowhere. It's like I'm spouting fake facts.
So what would go somewhere?
I don't know. If I had the answer, I'd have a new job.
Can I offer you a suggestion?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
you were cutting me off just as I was reaching my punchline.
It's so difficult, this conversation. I guess I'm cutting you off out of my anxiety of this particular line of question. But we'll make this the last question from Bret and allow those of the audience who have questions, I'll be bringing them to you.
You know, we were chatting just earlier before the event about how many ideas I get for columns by public appearances and just exchanges with audiences that spark thought. I was in Australia a little more than a year ago, and I gave a speech at basically the Sydney Public Library, beautiful space. And a young woman, college-aged it seemed, stood up and said, the question was in effect, you know, Israel's a settler colonialist state, and you know, how do you justify its existence as a settler colonialist state? And it was startling to be in Australia being asked this question. So I asked the audience, I said, would anyone here who has is Aboriginal or has Aboriginal ancestors please raise their hand? Of course, there was no one in the audience that did, but it was startling that a state, a country that is the quintessence of settler colonialism, is so mindless about the nature of its statehood. And so I pointed out to this young woman that not just Australia, but New Zealand and Canada and my own country, the United States, right here, unless you can claim ancestry going back to its native inhabitants, they're all settler colonialist states. Settler colonialism explains much of the Arab world. Why do they speak Arabic, a language that originated several thousand miles to the east in Morocco, for just to take one example? I said there's one state in the world that is the product of the longest continuous anti-colonial struggle in history, because the Jews were fighting the colonizers, and this is a historical fact, 2,500 years ago through the Babylonian captivity. They were fighting the Greeks 2,200 years ago. That's why we have this Jewish Christmas called Hanukkah. They were fighting the Romans 2,000 years ago at the time of Christ. They were fighting the Byzantines. They were fighting the Mamluks. They were fighting the Ottomans. And they were fighting, like so many other anti-colonial movements, the Brits, right up until 1948. So if you are, in fact, opposed to settler colonialism, if that is where your sense of allyship lies, you've been rooting for the wrong team. The team you want to be on your grounds, is a team called Zionism. Now, by all means, does that mean you can't separate the land and have another state for Palestinians? Sure, that means that. But to turn around and make the case that the Jewish state is representative of settler colonialism, and you, as an American or Australian, are somehow innocent of it, is either deceitful or incredibly fatuous. I think the way to win these kinds of arguments is to employ the terms of reference that have been already set for these people making the case against Israel and say, I'm not arguing with your premise, but your premise leads you to should lead you to the opposite conclusion. Just as if you believe in women's rights, gay rights, democracy, opposition, all of these things, the only state that champions those things in that region is the Israeli state. So at least be consistent in your point of view.
So do you think anybody's going to listen to that argument?
And I'll tell you who's going to listen. We have to, as a community, stop thinking that the public is Park Slope and Brown University and Berkeley and the places to which we hope our children will get in. There is a big, wide American world that if it hasn't made up, or if it's not pro-Israel already, is at least reasonably agnostic. I speak on college campuses all over the place. The most interesting college campus where I spoke wasn't Harvard, I'll be there a few weeks, or Stanford. It was Colorado Mesa University, a public school on the western slope of Colorado, lots of vets, slightly older students. One of the best experiences of an audience I've had, not because they weren't asking challenging questions or because they were already on side or because they're evangelical Christians who believe in Israel, but because they hadn't shut their minds to the argument. And I think that there's a larger constituency there that we haven't tapped, we haven't thought about, than I think many of us fear. I think that Clinton is right. There's nothing wrong in America that can't be fixed not only by what is right in America, but by who is right in America.
Oh, optimistic.
All right, we have questions for you. Okay, I've asked that question already. Okay. Okay. All right. No, they're all good questions. I just asked them. Okay, how does that fear, both of anti-Semitism and of violence, animate our national conversation and policy debates?
So I think one of the things about the fear of anti-Semitic violence is that we know that it's going to continue. As I actually was telling Bret before, in May of 2025, a young couple was gunned down leaving an event for young Jewish professionals at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington. And the young woman, Sarah Milgram, who was murdered, had graduated from my university 2 years before. And I called my editor and I said to her, I have to add a paragraph to this book. And it's very hard to do that a few months before publication date, and we did. But I also knew that I wouldn't be able to add what happened next. And so 10 days after that, it was the firebombing in Boulder, Colorado, but it was too late to add something. And I knew that the fear about anti-Semitic violence is very real. It's legitimate. What people miss during the No Age is Entirely Golden is that it was also there back then, but it was just kind of buried in sources, and I had to dig it out. This is
a deceivingly simple but very important question, which is that anti-Semitism is often called the world's oldest form of hate. What is it about anti-Semitism that has given it such staying power?
So that is the question that everybody asks: why the Jews, right? So why, in your examples of all of the different countries that are settler colonial societies, nobody is trying to give Manhattan back to its native inhabitants, for sure. But why, it's always why the Jews, and why is whatever a group fears or is concerned about for itself, they project right onto the Jews, even if there are no Jews living among them. I mean, this is really the work of, we were talking about the great historian David Nirenberg and anti-Judaism, and how when different groups in society are arguing and fighting for power, fighting for directing the society in a certain way, what they do is they call the other side the Jews.
So scapegoating.
Scapegoating is more than that. Don't you think it's more than that?
Well, I have a theory,
Okay.
but I'm going to keep it short because this is for you this afternoon. The Jews have championed a set of ideas that are very unpleasant for authoritarian minds. Argument for the sake of heaven. Jews like to argue. They like to say no when others say yes, and yes when others say no. Freedom seeking. The template for freedom seeking in history is Moses' flight from oppression and dictatorship. Universal literacy, which is another form of freedom seeking, something championed by the Jews for a very long time. Monotheism and ethical universalism, which says that murder is wrong whether you're a Jew, Christian, Muslim, or a Buddhist. The idea of inscribing dissent into a tradition rather than demanding orthodoxy and consistency and uniformity in thought. All of this, I think, means that Jews are central to every liberal tradition and anathema to every despotic tradition, because Jews will always be a thorn in the side of those who want to rule absolutely. That's my theory.
But why the Jews? I mean, this is a people that is, 15 million, 16 million people in the world today? Why this one tiny, tiny group? In the US, we're about 2% of the population now, something like that. I think there's something more there, and honestly, maybe it goes back, especially in Christian societies, it goes back to the charge of deicide. What did the Jews do? They did the worst thing ever possible. They killed God. And sometimes when you see some of these protests about the anti-Semitic protests, especially coming from the right, not so much from the left, but the ones coming from the right, there was this protest when Kanye West had gone on one of his rants, and there was a group called the Goyim Defense League, and they hung out banners over Highway 405 in Los Angeles, and one of those banners had said Revelations, I think 3:9, and John maybe 8:44, and those are the references to Jews living in the synagogue of Satan, and that the devil is their father. And what was really interesting about that was that some media, where I saw those images, they blurred out that part of the picture. They didn't want people to see it.
It's amazing. This is a very good question, and it's headed failure of Holocaust education. We have spent decades institutionalizing Holocaust education, yet we're seeing generations who've learned never again openly justify violence against Jews, often using Holocaust inversion or universalization. How did Holocaust education fail to prevent this breakdown, and what must change in how we teach the Holocaust and anti-Semitism? Good question, whoever wrote this.
Yeah, it is an excellent question. The problem is, the premise of Holocaust education was that it was going to eradicate hate. That if people saw students, teachers, and I think the US Holocaust Memorial Museum just had its maybe 50 millionth visitor, that if people could see where hate led, namely to genocide, that they wouldn't hate, any kind of hate. But the problem is that wasn't the solution. And the other thing is, every time you look at the Anti-Defamation League's kind of list of, people who hold 6 or more anti-Semitic ideas, so even if they find only 10% of Americans holding those ideas, that's 33 million people. How are we going to reach them?
Do you think the American Jewish community made a fundamental mistake, a well-meaning but fundamental mistake, in centering the Holocaust as our public identity?
Not only in centering the Holocaust as our public identity, in centering Israel as our public identity. Back when, early in my career, when I was just beginning to teach in the 70s and the 80s, I said that American Jews had made a major mistake in centering the Holocaust, but also in hanging our identity as a community on Israel. And at that time, of course, Israel didn't present any the kinds of problems in terms of identity that it presents for many young Jews today. But the American Jewish community, it just missed the boat in terms of not figuring out exactly what it was.
What should be the center of our identity?
I think American Jews tried different things. In the 50s, it was joining synagogues, right? The 50s and 60s, huge synagogue building boom in America. People joined synagogues. They didn't go to them for religious services so much. And then there was, I think, the effort to kind of embrace American Jewish identity by the 60s, when we get the Black is Beautiful movement. So then it's Jews as an ethnicity, and there was that Levi's Rye campaign where you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy Levi's Rye. But I think that, I'm not sure where we're gonna hang it, but we need to come to grips with what it means to be an American Jew in all its enormous diversity, right? Everything from completely secular, agnostic, Jews of, partly Jewish, raising children who are both Jewish and Christian simultaneously. I have a student this semester who went to Catholic school, and in class, when we were discussing the Gospels, he told me the entire narrative. I had no idea of some of the things that he said. I didn't even know it that well. And then after class, we're talking, and he says he's really having trouble getting his homework done because the holidays are here. And it was an amazing moment, but we need to embrace that all the way to the ultra-Orthodox on the right, and figure out some way of unifying around some common themes, which is why this moment, one of the common themes that Jews unify around is anti-Semitism. It enhances identity.
A notorious carpet salesman from Pittsburgh, who shall go nameless, once suggested to me, in fact was trying to raise some funds for this, a traveling museum of Jewish ideas. How many Americans know that if they enjoy their weekends, that started off as a Jewish idea? How many Americans who claim to champion social justice understand that social justice has its roots in foundational Jewish concepts of how you deal justly with the poor, with the less fortunate? And he went down the list, from the weekend to the Salk vaccine or whatever. Do you think something like that would make an impression on Americans to understand the kind of cultural, civilizational, scientific debt America has for the Jewish contribution to their well-being?
Do you think it's going to change the mind of the 33 million who hold 6 or more anti-Semitic ideas about the Jews?
I think the problem is not the 33 million. I think the problem is the 150 million who might acquiesce or kind of go along with the 33 million. That's where I worry.
Right.
There's always going to be a hardcore of anti-Semites in any society for reasons that I think are in a sense mysterious. But in any given society, the balance rests with a kind of indifferent or mostly indifferent majority that isn't necessarily disposed to prejudice, but is it inoculated from prejudice? And I wonder whether that carpet salesman named Lou is onto something that the inoculation of the center of the many is the key to responding to and solving our problem. Final question. I know Carol is looking at us. We had this debate. You took the more optimistic side of that debate. It is true that anti-Semitism is an American tradition. It has traced a kind of sine curve over centuries. Are you still fundamentally optimistic about our trajectory?
I'm still fundamentally optimistic because this is not Europe. I don't expect that there will be a Holocaust here. I don't expect that the government will institute anti-Semitic persecutions again. And then the other reason I'm fundamentally optimistic is if I have to go somewhere, where am I going to go?
I'm optimistic because great scholars and great minds and great writers like Pamela Nadell put her heart and her mind and her soul into the things that matter most. It's an honor to share this evening with you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
And I am optimistic because all of you are here and those of you online. Thank you. Thank you again to Pam and Bret for your invaluable insights this evening. I hope that you, like I have, found this conversation to be illuminating. Thank you also to Gina, my wonderful partner, and the entire team of Carnegie Mellon University, and our very generous supporters who made this evening possible. Please do join us for a reception where we are selling Pam's book, and she will be happy to sign it for you in the Conan room. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.